Financial Survival Network, helping you survive and thrive in the new economy. Go to carrylutz.com and sign up for 30 free micro trainings on financial survival.
$14.90 WGCH. This is Kerry Lutz. You're listening to the Financial Survival Network. With me now is Dr. Yaron Brook. He is head of the Ayn Rand Institute. He's been in that position for the past 11 years, and he's an authority on objectivism and libertarianism. Dr. Brook, welcome to the Financial Survival Network.
Thanks for having me on.
I saw you in a debate recently with a gentleman from the Demos Institute, and I think it summed up the prime challenge of objectivism, libertarianism, as opposed to statism, and that is who creates wealth, the individual or the government. He seemed to be of the opinion that it was the government. What's your opinion on that topic?
Well, I think it's quite clear and obvious that it's individuals who create wealth. It's individuals going into business, creating products, creating services, trading with one another. Those are the activities that actually create wealth. Inventing stuff, creating more efficient business processes, competing in the business world, and you can measure wealth. I mean, wealth is when somebody makes a profit. That's wealth. When somebody in America, we talk about making money. It's really making money is truly an American concept, because before the Industrial Revolution, before we were free to trade and produce, the only way you could get money was by taking it, by stealing it in a sense. Only through capitalism, through production, through freedom, do you actually make money? Do you actually see the pie growing over time? So it's people acting under freedom, producing stuff. That's how wealth is created, and government can in a sense help that by staying out of the way and protecting property rights, or as it has for the last at least 100 years, it can hinder that activity by interfering with property rights, interfering with the free choices of individuals, by regulating and taxing, and indeed. The 20th century is a century that is a huge missed opportunity, because imagine the wealth created, imagine the standard of living we would have today if we lived under freedom for that century.
And that brings us to the hero of the left, hero of the statists, one of the so-called greatest presidents of all time, FDR, Franklin Delano Roosevelt. How would you sum up his tenure, his 3.5, almost 4 terms in office?
Well, I mean, I think FDR was kind of an amazing president. If you look objectively at what he achieved, he is an adjunct failure. By every standard, economic standard, put aside kind of World War II, but in terms of what he did for the economy, he is an adjunct failure. He kept the United States in a depression. He did nothing to help it. He did everything to sustain that depression, I'd say, through World War II until 1944-45, when the war was finally over and we got out of the depression. And yet, what's amazing about him is that historically, the perception of him is that he's the great president, that he got us out of the depression. So, the PR campaign that the left has put together is amazing in terms of the reputation that FDR has. And I'd say what the right has done is pathetic, given how big of a failure FDR was, and the fact that the right has been impotent and completely incompetent in portraying him as such. But FDR, clearly is a failure. Everything he did was a disaster economically, and millions and millions and millions of people suffered as a consequence. And in many respects, we are still, to this day, suffering the consequences of what was done under the FDR administration.
There's really a myth around FDR that he got us out of the Depression, through his policies. And until that myth is somehow tackled or destroyed, how can you really take on the New Deal programs, which are still basically a millstone around the country's and the world's neck? How can you do one without the other?
Absolutely, and it's more just than that. It's more than just the New Deal programs. It's the fact that the perception that government can solve these kinds of problems is alive and well because of the myth of FDR. And as a consequence, Obama can come into office and say, we got a financial, crisis, and therefore, or for Bush for that matter, and therefore government needs to do A, B, C, D. And the textbook they're looking at is what FDR did. I mean, what is the stimulus program? It's just what FDR did. Dodd-Frank is just exactly what FDR did. If you look at FDR when he came into office, the things that he did were huge stimulus packages and huge regulations of financial services. Obama and Bush followed exactly the same tact when the financial crisis happened. So the model for getting us out of a depression is the model of the 1930s. And until we completely destroy that model, we will continue to repeat those same mistakes. And, the same is true of the Federal Reserve. Bernanke is a student of the Great Depression, right? So he's trying to do with the Federal Reserve. He's trying to avoid the mistakes made in the Great Depression without understanding that really the big mistake is the very creation of the Federal Reserve and the very existence of the Federal Reserve. Of course, that was done under another one of my favorite presidents, President Wilson, who might be even worse than FDR, because intellectually, Wilson and then the third guy I would put in here is a guy that the right likes a lot, and that's Roosevelt's cousin, Teddy Roosevelt. Mm-hmm. And those three, I think, set in motion the destruction of what was America, because they set in motion the progressive ideas. They set in motion the ideas of statism, but they set it in motion not just politically, but intellectually. They set it in motion from an intellectual perspective. And I think one of the reasons the myth of FDR survives is not so much because of a misunderstanding on economics, but more because it is consistent with people's view with regard to ethics, with regard to individual rights, and with regard to the role of government. So what we really need to challenge, and this is Ayn Rand's great contribution and why Atlas Shrugged could predict what's going on today, is that we need to fight this battle as a philosophical battle, not just an economic battle. We need to understand the underlying premise that made the New Deal possible and why it's so popular today. We need to challenge the progressives, not on economics, but just like they did. See, the progressives didn't come and say capitalism doesn't work. The progressives came and said capitalism's unfair. Capitalism's immoral. And you can hear this language in Obama today. Obama talks about fairness all the time. He doesn't talk about economics. He doesn't talk about what works. He doesn't talk about creating wealth. He talks about fairness. He doesn't care if GDP declines as long as we get fairness. If standard of living declines as long as we get fairness. That is the message of the progressives. That ethical idea that fairness equals equality of outcome, and that's what we should strive towards, and capitalism destroys that, therefore we should fight against capitalism. That's what we need to challenge. We need to challenge the left's conception of fairness. And the Republicans can't do that. They don't do that because they actually agree with their definition of fairness. So they can never challenge it. We're seeing that in the Republican debates right now, arguing about, the vice of being rich.
It used to be they were rearranging the deck chairs on the Titanic. Now all they're doing is moving around the cushions on the deck chairs. There's no discussion of what is really wrong. It's always capitalism failed. That's why we're in this financial crisis. They won't take responsibility, and they know full well statism failed. Socialism, collectivism, that's at the root of all of our problems now, aren't they?
Absolutely. But part of the problem is that, and this is a problem I think that many of us on the right are to blame for, is we don't define capitalism properly. That is, if people's perception is that in 2007 we had capitalism, then sure, it failed. But we didn't have capitalism in 2007. We had a mixed economy dominated by statism. And indeed, the industries that failed, the mortgage industry, the housing industry, and the banking industry, are three of the most statist industries. They're three of the most regulated, controlled, subsidized industries in the United States. And there's no accident that they're the ones who failed. So but we need to define capitalism. To me, capitalism is true free markets, which means no government involvement in the economy, a true respect for property rights, government limited to the job of protecting those property rights and nothing else, and otherwise leaving people free. That, to me, is the standard by which we measure everything. That is what capitalism is. That's what freedom really is. What we had in 2007 was not capitalism. It was a mixed economy. Yes, the mixed economy failed. Now we can discuss which elements within that mixture failed. And it's clearly, and it's easy to show it wasn't the free elements, it was the statist elements. But we have to rescue the concept of capitalism. When Gingrich defends capitalism, when Romney defends capitalism, they don't know what they're talking about. The concept that they're trying to defend is not real freedom. It's some mixture that's maybe a little less government than what we have today, but it's not real capitalism. Capitalism is the separation of state from economics. It's complete freedom of trade, it's complete freedom of contract, and it's, again, the relegation of government to one job and one job only, and that's the protection of property rights.
And on that note, when we're talking about the proper function of government, what government should be doing, is it appropriate for government to be trying to protect us from ourselves, i.e. the war on alcohol, the war on drugs, the war on guns? I mean, you name it. We got more wars going on within this country right now than outside the country, which is a lot.
No, of course not. I mean, the role of government, as I think the founders understood it, and as as we understand it today, certainly as Ayn Rand has portrayed it, is to protect individual rights. There is only one way to violate somebody's rights, and that is by using force of fraud against them. Therefore, the only role of government is to protect us from force and from fraud. It's to protect individual rights, to protect our freedoms, to protect us from people coming in and infringing on our freedoms. Somebody breaking into my house, somebody, selling me, through fraud, selling me property that he doesn't really own. That's the role of government. It's to catch Bernie Madoff, and they can't even do that. It's to catch Bernie Madoff. That's the role of government. It's to catch the terrorists. It's to protect our borders, and it's to really catch the crooks. And it's not to protect us from ourselves. Suicide should be legal in any form that we choose to engage in it. And that form could be alcohol, it could be drugs, it could be putting a bullet in our brain, it could be whatever form, but it's not government's job to protect us from making mistakes, from committing suicide, from making choices that might not be mistakes, that our neighbor might think is a mistake, but I might not think is a mistake. So, government needs to stay out of our lives and limit itself to what it was, what the American Revolution was all about. That is limiting government to the protection of individual rights and recognizing that your life belongs to you, that the individual's life is theirs to live as they please, and it's none of anybody's business to tell him how to live it.
Yeah, and then we've got guys like Doug Casey, who believes that through technology, anarchy is now an option. How do you answer a Doug Casey who thinks that we don't need cops, we don't need an army, and we don't need a government, that it can all be done by mutual consent?
I think that's a view that is completely detached from reality and completely detached from human nature and from human history. So I think it's completely detached. Anarchy is a call for totalitarianism. And all anarchy will lead is to greater statism. It means that the guy with the biggest guns gets to dominate everybody else. And it's a call for more violence. When there is no cop, people resort to violence. That's the history of mankind. We need government. We need an entity. See, I don't believe government is a necessary evil. I think government is a necessary good. It's the proper government, a government that monopolizes the use of force. That is, that it's an entity that doesn't allow the use of force and only uses force as in retaliation. That kind of government is necessary if we're going to have civilization. Anarchy, in my view, is anti-civilization, anti-human nature, and results in ultimately in the guy with the biggest gun controlling everything.
I agree with you there. I think that anarchy really, our founding fathers, that was, for instance, Alexander Hamilton, his greatest fear was that the fragile republic would devolve into anarchy. But then we get into the thing where you give a government limited powers, a constitution to rein it in, to protect the people from the government, because government is the greatest hazard that we face, worse than marauding teenagers running rampant in downtown Chicago. And yet, how does a society rein in government and keep it reined in? That, to me, is the big issue. It's limited government. How do you keep it limited?
So I think the way to keep it limited is a philosophy that has to become prevalent in the population. Look, you can't limit government unless people want limited government. And the question is why we had limited government, or at least very limited government, now maybe not as ideal as we would like, but very limited government through the 19th century. Why did that go away? And Ayn Rand believed, and I believe, that it went away because the Founding Fathers had in them a contradiction. And that the founding of this country is founded in a contradiction. At the political level, the Founding Fathers, and indeed Enlightenment thinkers generally, believed that the individual owns himself and should be free to pursue his own happiness. It's in our Declaration of Independence. But at an ethical level, at a moral level, they believed that the individual owed his life to other people, that his moral commitment was to be his brother's keeper. I mean, Jefferson takes the Bible, the New Testament, and he rips it up, and he keeps only the parts that he likes. But the parts of he likes are all about the virtue of self-sacrifice, the virtue of being your brother's keeper, the virtue of you not owning your own life. The community owns you by moral claim. Unless that is challenged, and this is Ayn Rand's genius. This is what she challenged. Ayn Rand is not primarily a political writer. Ayn Rand is primarily an ethicist. She's challenging the morality that is prevalent in our culture. We have to challenge the idea that you are your brother's keeper. If you believe that you are primarily your own keeper, that your moral responsibility is to yourself and to your own happiness and to your own success, if you want to help, if helping your brother is an option, not a moral necessity, then what kind of government do you want? If you believe that morally, your moral responsibility, your moral duty is to pursue your own happiness, you want a government that protects your right to pursue your own happiness. But if you believe that your moral responsibility is to be your brother's keeper, you want a government that helps you be your brother's keeper, that taxes you so you can help your brother, that regulates other people's behavior so they don't hurt your brother. So the fundamental revolution, the fundamental battle that we're engaged in today is not a political battle. It's not an economic battle. It is an ethical battle. It is about the soul of Americans. It's about what is your moral responsibility? Is it to yourself or is it to your brother? If we can win that battle, we can have limited government. If we don't win that battle, and I don't think the founders won this battle, then we'll lose limited government even if we get it. And that's what happened in the revolution. We had limited government because the Founding Fathers were great political thinkers. We lost it because there was no ethicist who could provide a moral foundation for this political revolution. I think that's the role Ayn Rand plays. I think that's why she's the most important figure in the 20th century. If we're going to have a limited government, it's going to have to be on the foundation that she laid.
The moral thing, as we've been conditioned to believe by society, by our schools, by our religions, everyone, is that take care of your brother almost at the same time or even before you take care of yourself. And that's the key to a satisfying and contented life. And in fact, that twist on morality leads to the greatest immorality that's imaginable, i.e. the U.S. government, right?
Well, ultimately, yes, but there are greater evils than the U.S. government. Ultimately, that morality leads to communism and fascism and Nazism. I mean, remember that when the Nazis did what they did it for the greater good, for the common good. What did the Nazis really attack? What did the communists, in this case, they're the same. They attacked individualism. They attacked the idea that you have a right to your own happiness. They attacked the idea of selfishness. If you go into the writings of the communists and the fascists and all statists, including Obama, all statists share this. All statists hate the idea that you should morally pursue your own happiness. They all want you to be your brother's keeper. They all want you to be the state's servant. They all want you to sacrifice for somebody. They might disagree about who. The religious theocracies want you to sacrifice for God. The Nazis wanted you to sacrifice for the Aryan race. The communists wanted you to sacrifice for the proletarian. Obama wants you to sacrifice for equality, but equality of mankind or whatever it is. All of them want you to sacrifice. That's the basis of their morality. That's the basis on which they stand. We need to make the consequence of that clear to people, and we need to offer them an alternative that is not just Ayn Rand, but it goes back to the Greeks, it goes back to Aristotle. Morality should be not about what you can do for your brother, not about self-sacrifice, not about being, your suffering and somebody else's gain. Morality should be about how to make your life the best that you can be. How do you rationally, from a long-term perspective, pursue your own happiness? Morality is about self-interest. This is what Aristotle understood. He claimed morality was about achieving eudaimonia, which is individual happiness, fulfillment, success. If we could get people to think about morality in those terms, then the primary thing they will want from government is to be left alone and for government to help them protect themselves from violence from other people. That's it. It's all about this. The revolution that's necessary in the next, few decades is a moral revolution, and it's that revolution has to happen if we're going to get a government that is limited to protection of individual rights.
Yeah, that's really a great point. When you talk about freedoms and that the government really doesn't want you to pursue your own happiness, that they want you to be your brother's keeper, what comes to mind, what popped into my head when you said that, is the creation of the automobile. The government has been fighting that. It was the biggest attack on government power ever, certainly one of the biggest ones, because then you didn't have to worry about a train that the government helped set the rates and set the schedule for and took it over in times of peril. You could just come and go as you pleased. Before there were speed limits, you could go as fast as you felt you wanted to or as slow as you wanted to. And the government's been trying to regulate it ever since, regulate it, control it. It's the same kind of thing with the internet. They're doing the same thing there. The internet is like total intellectual and philosophical freedom when you get down to it, because you can go any place there, pursue any thought or belief that you feel it's relevant to you and is in your interest. And what are they trying to do now? They're trying to shut that down, put a speed limit on it, set up speed traps. So if you're doing things they don't want you to, then you can lose your freedom as a result, right?
No, I think that's absolutely right. And again, I mean, I would emphasize the question of why do people go along with that? Let's take for granted that people in government are primarily there for the power, and maybe they even just enjoy, making me drive slower because it gives them a sense of control over my life and power. But why do people go along with that? What is it that makes us vote for these people every time, that prevents people from seeing through them, that makes people suspicious of the internet, suspicious of mobility, suspicious of freedom? And I think, again, and I emphasize this because I think this is the key. I think it's morality. I think people, what is it that they don't trust about us driving cars? What is it that they don't trust about us browsing the internet? What they don't trust, what they've been taught. So, this morality thing goes two ways. On the one hand, we're taught to be your brother's keeper. But on the other hand, what are we taught about self-interest? We're taught that self-interest is inherently corrupt. We're taught that if you leave people alone out there in the marketplace, they'll do horrible things to one another. That we're inherently corrupt, we're inherently bad. That if you just let people trade with one another freely, if there are no elevator inspectors, that the guy who makes elevators is going to make elevators that kill people, right? Just because why? Because he's selfish, and selfish, we know, is an evil word. You see, so why do we want to regulate the internet? Because God forbid, if we don't regulate the internet, people will do whatever they want. They'll do horrible, horrible things. They'll all become child pornographers or whatever. And that is how we've been conditioned morally to think. We've been conditioned morally to think we're our brother's keeper. We need to protect him from the bad guys. And who are the bad guys? The bad guys are selfish people. And who's more selfish than anybody when we look out into the world? Well, it's those businessmen who pursue profit. Profit is selfish, right? You can't hide that. They're pursuing their own self-interest. So we need to protect people from people pursuing profit. or people pursuing any form of self-interest. Now, and the consequence is we're all kind of split, right? On the one hand, every American pursues their own self-interest to some extent. We couldn't survive if we didn't. But then we're guilted into thinking that's a bad thing. So we feel like we have to vote for limits in our own self-interest. We feel like we have to go into do massive community service and charity in order to reduce our guilty feelings. But so they manipulate us. The politicians manipulate us through ethics, through the sense of guilt that we have, and through the distrust of self-interested behavior that we have out there. We distrust the elevator builder. We distrust the builder of homes. We distrust the people on the internet. We distrust the people who sell us food. They might poison us if not for the FDA. All of this has been ingrained in us through a moral code that is inherently corrupt, and that unless we replace it, we are doomed.
I think you've summed it up really well. People just keep buying into it, and they miss the broader question, which is really man against state, and should you be free to pursue your own happiness, or should you be a servant to help others realize their happiness? That is the debate of our lives, and unfortunately, most people don't even know that that's the debate, do they?
No, and I think those of us who believe that that's the debate, we need to make that clear. We need to make good economic arguments, but we have some great economists on our side. But on top of the economic arguments, we need to start making these moral, philosophical points about what is really at stake here. And really it is, who owns your life? Should you own it? Or is your life, really belongs to the community, the state, your neighbor, but are you a servant or are you a free man? And I think if we frame it that way, if we frame the debate that way, then I think we can win, because I think Americans deep down, emotionally, they want to think that they own their own lives. Emotionally, they want to think that they are free to pursue their own happiness. And that that's what we as fighters for freedom need to hook into with the American people. And that's what the presidential candidates are awful at doing. They're inarticulate and they're not competent to really do that, to hook into that feeling that Americans have about freedom, about owning their own lives, and not being slaves and servants to their neighbors, to community, to the state, and so on. Remember John McCain's slogan for his presidential campaign?
Something about straight talk, or
no, it was country first.
Oh, right, yes.
Never has there been a more fascist slogan in American history for a campaign. I couldn't vote for McCain as soon as he did that. So, we need candidates that can say it's the individual first, and we need to educate American people that it's their happiness first, and it's their pursuit of happiness first, and it's their pursuit of their right to life first. And until we can educate them that those are the fundamental political issue. And I don't like the idea of man versus state, because I think that leads into an anarchist position. I think it's the right state. What kind of state? The state that protects our ability to pursue happiness. That's the kind of state that we want. And a state like that is a state that's very minimal, but does one thing and does it really well, and that's the protection of individual rights.
Great point. We're definitely going to have you on to the show again to further articulate that message, because it really is the essence of the battle that's going on right now in Washington and on Main Street. It's who owns your life? Who do you serve, yourself or the state? Who's your master, you or the state? Great points. I want to thank you for being on. We'll put up a link on our site to the Ayn Rand Institute, and we'll look forward to having you on again. It's been a pleasure. Thanks, Doctor.
Good talking to you.